All right, you're looking right now, live look on Capitol Hill, the halls of the Capitol, and you're seeing right now the entourage in front of the president. Let's just stay on this, guys, as we watch the president go by. He's going to be walking by cameras, and we will see if he speaks. Let's listen in just as he passes by.
What's your message to the holdouts?
Well, it's not a question of holdouts. We have a tremendously unified party. I don't think we've ever had a party like this. There are some people that want a couple of things that maybe I don't like or that they're not going to get. But I think we're going to have tremendous, not luck, we have tremendous talent. This man has done an incredible job as Speaker. You know, we had a majority of 1. We were 1 heart attack away from losing the House, okay? Now we have 7. That's a big, because we won some elections, as you probably noticed, and we're going to win a lot of elections. We have an economy that's roaring. We took out 5.1 billion. If you take a look, 5.1 trillion with a T, not a B.
Okay, so I need you to stop everything you are doing right now, because what I am about to tell you is genuinely terrifying, and everyone in this country needs to understand what just happened. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, just suggested that 6 members of Congress should be executed for their actions. He said what they did was punishable by death. He boosted a post calling to hang them on the Washington Mall for everyone to see. This is not hyperbole on my part. This is not me exaggerating for effect to get your attention. This is exactly what happened, and I have the receipts to prove every word of it. Trump went on Truth Social and called these lawmakers guilty of seditious behavior and said it was punishable by death under the law. He said they should be arrested and put on trial immediately for what they did. And then, because apparently that was not extreme enough for him, he amplified a post that literally called for them to be hanged publicly like criminals. We are talking about a sitting president calling for the execution of elected members of Congress. This is happening right now in America in 2025. And if that does not terrify you, then you are not paying close enough attention to what is unfolding in front of our eyes. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust headlines anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
I think we're a very unified party. The Senate's doing great. John Thune is doing fantastically. He's a great guy. And we're going to have a bill, the one big beautiful bill. I think it's the biggest bill ever passed, and we got to get it done. Tremendous tax cuts for people, tremendous incentives, tremendous regulation cuts, all these regulations that are so horrible. And now you find out what happened, because Biden, look, it's a very sad thing what happened, but we're going to start looking into this whole thing with who signed this legislation. Who signed legislation opening our border? I don't think he knew. I said there's nobody that could want an open border. Nobody. And now I find out that it wasn't him. He auto-penned it. Who was operating the auto-pen? This is a very serious thing. We had a president that didn't sign anything. He auto-penned almost everything. He opened the borders of the United States of America. And I kept saying, who would do such a thing? Allowing criminals to pour in from all over the world, not just South America, all over the world. They came in from Africa, they came in from Asia, they came from the Congo. The prisons in the Congo in Africa, these are rough people. The prisons from the Congo are empty. You know where they are? They're in this country. Who would sign this? Nobody would sign it. No sane person would sign it. You know who signed it? Radical left lunatics that were running our country.
So what exactly did these 6 Democratic lawmakers do that was so terrible that Trump thinks they deserve to die for it? They posted a video reminding American troops that they have a legal duty to refuse illegal orders. That is it. That is the whole crime, according to Donald Trump. These lawmakers, who by the way include military veterans and people with national security backgrounds who actually served this country honorably, made a video explaining basic constitutional law to service members. They said that no one is obligated to carry out orders that violate the law or the Constitution of the United States. They reminded troops that their oath is to the Constitution first, not to any individual president, no matter who that president is, and for stating this completely accurate and legally correct information that has been military doctrine for decades, Trump says they should be put to death. Let that sink in for a moment and really think about what it means. The president wants to execute people for correctly explaining the Constitution to members of the military. He wants them dead for telling troops the truth about their legal obligations. The reaction on Capitol Hill has been absolute chaos since Trump posted this insanity for the world to see. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer took to the floor and said the President of the United States is advocating for the execution of elected officials. He called it an outright threat against members of Congress that cannot be ignored. He said Trump is igniting a fire in a country that is already soaked with political gasoline and could explode at any moment. And he is absolutely right about that assessment of where we are. We have already seen political violence in this country tear communities apart. We have already seen attacks on elected officials by radicalized individuals. We have already seen what happens when rhetoric like this gets amplified to millions of people who take it seriously. And now the president himself is suggesting that members of Congress should be hanged for defending the Constitution. Even some Republicans are trying to distance themselves from this, although of course most of them are too cowardly to actually condemn Trump directly by name because they fear his base. The Defense Department has now opened a formal review after Senator Mark Kelly and others raised serious security concerns about what Trump said publicly. Democratic leaders are demanding additional protection for the lawmakers Trump targeted by name. Outside groups are renewing calls for impeachment or removal from office immediately. This is a genuine constitutional crisis unfolding in real time right in front of us. The president is threatening to kill his political opponents for explaining the law accurately. And the question everyone should be asking right now is what happens next in this nightmare scenario? What happens if Trump actually tries to give illegal orders to the military, expecting blind obedience? What happens if troops follow those orders because they are afraid of what Trump will do to them if they refuse? What happens to our democracy when the president treats the Constitution itself as a crime punishable by death? These are the urgent questions we are facing right now, and we need to talk about them seriously before it is too late. All right, let us get into the details of what actually happened here, because the full context makes this even more disturbing than the headline suggests. So there are these 6 Democratic lawmakers who all have military or national security backgrounds from their careers before Congress. We are talking about people like Senator Mark Kelly, who is a former Navy combat pilot and NASA astronaut who served his country with distinction. We are talking about Senator Alyssa Slotkin, who worked for the CIA and the Defense Department on critical national security matters. These are not random politicians with no experience in military affairs shooting their mouths off. These are people who have actually served their country in uniform and in intelligence roles and understand how the military works from the inside out. They know the laws and regulations that govern military conduct because they lived under those rules themselves. They know what service members are and are not required to do under their oaths because they took those same oaths. These 6 lawmakers put together a video that was directed at current members of the military serving our country. And the message was simple and straightforward and completely accurate, legally speaking. They explained that troops have a duty to refuse illegal orders when given them. They said that the oath military members take is to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, not to blindly follow any individual, including the president, no matter who holds that office. They said no one is obligated to carry out orders that violate the law or our Constitution under any circumstances. This is not some radical interpretation of military law that they invented. This is basic doctrine that has been taught at military academies and training facilities for generations going back decades. The Nuremberg trials after World War II established clearly that following orders is not a defense for committing illegal acts against humanity. The Uniform Code of Military Justice makes crystal clear that service members must refuse unlawful orders. This is settled law that everyone in the military learns during basic training on their first days of service. But Trump saw this video and completely lost his mind over it in a way that reveals everything about his intentions. He went on Truth Social on November 20th, 2025, and started posting in all caps like a maniac having a breakdown. He called what these lawmakers did seditious behavior against the United States. He said it was punishable by death under the law. He demanded that they be arrested and put on trial immediately for their supposed crimes. And then he boosted, meaning he amplified to his millions of followers who hang on his every word, a post that called for these lawmakers to be hanged on the Washington Mall as a public spectacle. Think about what that means for a moment. The president saw a post calling for the public execution of members of Congress, and he thought, yes, I want more people to see this message and agree with it. He used his massive platform to spread a call for hanging elected officials. This is not dog whistle politics anymore, where you have to read between the lines. This is the president explicitly endorsing violence against his political opponents in the clearest possible terms. Now, let us talk about why Trump reacted this way, because it reveals something incredibly important about his mindset and his plans going forward. Trump did not get angry because these lawmakers said something false or dangerous to national security. He got angry because they reminded troops that they do not have to follow illegal orders from anyone, including him. Why would that make him so furious unless he is planning to give illegal orders and expects them to be followed without question? Why would he want troops to think they must obey any command from the president, no matter what, unless he intends to command them to do things that violate the law and the Constitution? This is the terrifying subtext of Trump's meltdown that everyone needs to understand. He is telling on himself in revealing his authoritarian intentions. He is revealing that he expects absolute obedience from the military, regardless of whether his orders are legal or constitutional. And anyone who reminds troops of their actual legal obligations is now an enemy who deserves death in his twisted mind. The reaction from Democrats has been fierce and immediate, as you would expect, given the severity of what happened. Chuck Schumer's speech on the Senate floor was one of the most direct condemnations of a sitting president we have heard in modern American history. He said Trump is advocating for the execution of elected officials openly. He said this is an outright threat that cannot be dismissed or ignored. He said Trump is pouring gasoline on an already dangerous situation that could explode into violence. Other Democrats have called for impeachment proceedings to begin immediately without delay. They argue that threatening to kill members of Congress is exactly the kind of high crime the impeachment clause was designed to address by the founders. Some are invoking the 25th Amendment and saying Trump is clearly unfit to hold office if he thinks executing his opponents is acceptable behavior for a president. Outside groups like Free Speech for People have issued formal calls for Trump's removal over what they are calling death threats against members of Congress that endanger lives. Even some Republicans have tried to create distance from Trump's rhetoric, although as usual, they are doing it in the most cowardly way possible without actually standing up to him. When asked about Trump's posts, most Republicans either refuse to comment entirely or say things like "that is not the language I will use personally, that is not the language I will use," as if the problem is just poor word choice and not the fact that the president is calling for the execution of lawmakers who serve in Congress. Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, tried to downplay the whole thing and change the subject quickly, which tells you everything about where Republican leadership stands on this issue. They know what Trump said is completely indefensible, but they are too afraid of his base and his wrath to actually condemn him for it directly, so they mumble something vague and hope the story goes away on its own. It is pathetic, but it is also dangerous because it signals to Trump that there will be no consequences from his own party, no matter how extreme his rhetoric gets or how many people he threatens. The Defense Department opening a formal review is significant and worth paying close attention to as this develops. Senator Kelly and others have raised serious security concerns about what Trump said publicly to millions of people. When the president calls for members of Congress to be hanged, that creates real and immediate danger for those individuals and their families. Trump has millions of followers who take what he says seriously and literally. Some of them have already shown willingness to commit violence in his name without hesitation. We saw that on January 6th when they stormed the Capitol. We have seen it in attacks on FBI offices and other targets since then. Putting a target on the backs of specific lawmakers by name and calling for their execution is reckless and dangerous in a way that could easily get people killed. The Defense Department review is looking at whether additional security measures are needed and whether Trump's statements created actionable threats against military or civilian officials. This is the reality we are living in now. The government has to review whether the president's own words constitute a threat to national security and the safety of elected officials. All right, let us break this down into the key points you need to understand about this situation and why it matters so much for the future of this country and our democracy. Point number 1, Trump is explicitly threatening to kill political opponents for defending the Constitution, and that is a fundamental red line that cannot be crossed in any democracy that wants to survive. There is no way to spin this or explain it away, no matter how hard his supporters try. The president said that lawmakers who reminded troops of their legal duty to refuse illegal orders should be put to death for their actions. He amplified calls for them to be hanged publicly on the National Mall. This is not ambiguous language. This is not open to interpretation or spin. The president wants his opponents dead for disagreeing with him about constitutional law and military obligations. In any functioning democracy, this would be immediately disqualifying for any leader. In any normal country, the president would be removed from office within days for saying something like this. But we do not live in a normal country anymore, apparently. We live in a country where the president can threaten to execute members of Congress and half the political establishment just shrugs and hopes it blows over without consequences. This matters because it sets a precedent for what is acceptable political discourse in America going forward. If the president can call for the execution of his opponents without consequences, then that becomes normalized behavior. It becomes something future presidents can do without fear. It becomes something that supporters of either party might start saying about the other side casually. Political violence becomes more likely when leaders model it from the top down. Trump is not just expressing frustration or using colorful language to make a point. He is telling his followers that his political enemies deserve to die for opposing him. Some of those followers will take that message seriously as a call to action. Some of them will act on it violently, and when they do, Trump will bear responsibility for creating the conditions that made that violence possible, and even likely, we have already seen this play out before. The rhetoric leads to radicalization, which leads to action. Trump knows this pattern, and he does it anyway, because he values his own power more than he values human life or democratic norms. Point number 2, the fact that Trump got so angry about a video explaining legal duties to the military suggests he is planning to give illegal orders and expects them to be followed without question. This is the most alarming part of this whole episode when you think about it carefully and consider the implications. Why would you care if troops know they can refuse illegal orders unless you are planning to give illegal orders yourself? Why would you want service members to think they must obey the president no matter what unless you intend to command them to do things that violate the law and constitution? Trump's extreme reaction reveals his intentions clearly. He wants a military that will follow his commands blindly without regard for legality or constitutionality. He wants soldiers who are loyal to him personally rather than to their oaths to the Constitution. And anyone who reminds troops that their real obligation is to the Constitution becomes an enemy who must be destroyed in his view. This creates a potential civil military crisis that we need to take very seriously as a nation. What happens if Trump orders the military to do something clearly illegal, like using troops to arrest political opponents or suppress peaceful protests or seize voting machines during an election? Officers who understand their legal obligations would refuse those orders as they are required to do. But Trump has now made clear that he views such refusals as sedition, punishable by death. He is trying to intimidate military personnel into compliance by threatening anyone who tells them they have the right to refuse unlawful commands. This is how authoritarians operate throughout history. They try to break down the institutional safeguards that prevent the abuse of power. They try to make the military personally loyal to the leader rather than to the Constitution and rule of law. Trump is following that authoritarian playbook openly, and we should all be terrified about where this leads if left unchecked. Point number 3, this episode strengthens the case for impeachment and removal and puts enormous pressure on Congress to act before it is too late. When the president threatens to execute members of Congress for defending the Constitution, that is about as clear a case of high crimes and misdemeanors as you can possibly get. The impeachment clause exists precisely for situations like this, when a president abuses power in ways that threaten the fundamental functioning of the government and the safety of other officials. Calling for the death of lawmakers who explain basic military law is an abuse of power. It is an attempt to intimidate Congress into silence and submission. It is an attack on the constitutional order itself that cannot be tolerated. If this does not warrant impeachment, then nothing does, and the impeachment clause is meaningless words on paper. Democrats are already renewing calls for impeachment proceedings to begin immediately. Outside groups are demanding action from Congress now. The question is whether there are enough votes in Congress to actually do anything meaningful. Republicans have shown over and over that they will not hold Trump accountable, no matter what he does or says. They did not convict him after January 6th when he incited an insurrection. They will probably not convict him now either. But that does not mean impeachment is pointless or a waste of time. Even an impeachment that does not result in conviction puts Trump's behavior on the official record for history. It forces every member of Congress to vote on whether threatening to kill your opponents is acceptable conduct for a president. It creates a historical record of what happened and who enabled it, and it might cause enough Republicans to finally break with Trump that some accountability becomes possible. The odds are not good, but the effort is still worth making because some things are too important to let slide without a fight. Point number 4. This is a test of whether our constitutional guardrails can hold against a president who openly rejects them and wants to tear them down. Everything about this episode comes down to one fundamental question. Can the Constitution survive a president who treats it as an obstacle to be destroyed rather than a document to be upheld and defended? Trump is not hiding what he is doing anymore. He is openly saying that people who defend the Constitution deserve death for doing so. He is openly trying to intimidate the military into ignoring their legal obligations to refuse unlawful orders. He is openly threatening members of Congress for doing their jobs and upholding their oaths. The guardrails are being tested right now in real time, and we will see if they hold. The courts will have to decide whether Trump can actually prosecute people for explaining military law accurately. Congress will have to decide whether to impeach him for threatening lawmakers with death. The military will have to decide whether to follow illegal orders if and when they come from this president. Every institution in our government is going to be tested by what Trump is doing right now. The next few weeks and months are going to determine whether those institutions hold firm or whether they collapse under the pressure. If Trump faces no consequences for this, if he can threaten to execute members of Congress and just move on to the next outrage without accountability, then the guardrails have failed completely. Then we no longer live in a constitutional republic in any meaningful sense of those words. We live in a country where the president can do whatever he wants, including killing his opponents, and no one can stop him. That is not democracy by any definition. That is tyranny, plain and simple. And we are closer to that dark reality than most people want to admit right now because it is too frightening to contemplate. So here's where we stand after this insane episode that should shake everyone to their core. The president has called for the execution of lawmakers who defended the Constitution of the United States. Capitol Hill is in chaos with Democrats demanding action. Democratic leaders are demanding impeachment and additional security for targeted members. The Defense Department is conducting a formal review of the threats, and Republicans are mostly hiding under their desks, hoping this all goes away without them having to take a stand. This is not normal governance. This is not okay by any standard. This is a constitutional emergency, and it should be treated as one by everyone who cares about the future of this country. Make sure you are subscribed because this story is developing rapidly, and we are going to stay on top of every development as it happens. The fight for American democracy is happening right now, and you need to know what is going on. I will see you in the next one.